Namaskar and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. I have with me Mr. Nick Collins, and I'm going to show you something that he's done. Let me just, take you around and introduce him to you. He's written a book, right? Ice Age to the mid 18th century, how the maritime trade and the Indian subcontinent shaped the world. Now, a lot of you would be wondering, somebody from the West writing something like that is quite interesting. And that's what I found. So I said, okay, let's have a conversation with him. He's a maritime historian, let me just say that, and he's got a lot of work coming out. He's also got another book which is called the Millennium Maritime Trade Revolution between the 700 to the 1700, and another book called the Chartering and the Dry Freight, the Essential Guide. Now I've ordered the first book, and I'm going to be enjoying reading it. But he mentioned something, and his pinned tweet, if I may just read this before I get him inside, and I'm just going to read a little line. He says the world's first maritime trade network emerged from India's Indus Sarasvati civilization, the most economically productive region before 3500 BC. Sir, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure and an honor having you on the platform.
Pleasure for me too. Thank you.
What made you so interested in the history of this part of the world, sir?
Well, I wasn't. I started with the intention of writing a history of maritime trade from the earliest time I could get it back to and to the present. And so I had no preconceptions, but it took me in the direction of India in the early trade networks. In the West, we are taught that Mesopotamia is the cradle of civilization, and the more I read, the more that seemed to me to be a nonsense, because civilization starts with the best conditions, and the best conditions are in biodiverse Indian subcontinent, not in a dry Mesopotamia, even though it might have been prior to 3000, 3500 more steppe like, rather like the Sahara was as well. But even so, Northwest India is fertilized by 7 rivers, not 2 in the case of Mesopotamia or 1 in the case of Egypt. So it seemed to me that this economically productive area, which was exporting through its ports in Northwest India and in Southeast India, seemed to me to be where I ought to concentrate my research, which led to my book, which you kindly put up there.
So when you started doing this, how much was it different for you from the contemporary thing that you've read and understood? Here is a country which is, people say, oh, not to be kind of considered, but here is something that is telling you that the cradle, as per se, of international trade started from here.
Yes, because it seemed to me that from everything that I read, either first-hand or second-hand, about Indian Vedic literature, seemed to me to indicate that it was a strongly maritime-orientated nation, and it was exporting goods, primarily food, into the Persian Gulf area, and so what interested me was what on earth were they exporting back to India? What did India need? And this led me to what I understand now is quite controversial, but what they apparently, that Mesopotamia's economy was based, let's say around 3000-ish BC, was based on sheep farming, so textiles, and they also sent merchants up into what is now northern Iraq and Turkey for the metals that especially southern Turkey has in the Taurus Mountains, silver, lead, tin, and so forth. And there was a little bit of trade in the Egyptian gold, but not too much, I think. And so it seemed to me that for all the food, the timber, that India was exporting, that this was barely necessary, barely equivalent. So then we get into another controversial topic. You want to talk about the Aryan invasion, but I'll talk about another controversial topic. And I'll briefly describe why it's controversial, if you don't mind. One of the fathers of archaeology, Flinders Petrie, was excavating in Egypt in the 1890s, and he was convinced, because he found a battle site and two different graveyards, that Egypt had been invaded from a Mesopotamian town, a strong Mesopotamian town at the time called Uruk, and that was called the dynastic race theory. It was widely believed, perfectly accepted by everybody. And then especially in the 1930s and the 1950s, boat graves started to be excavated, kind of homage to a seaborne invasion, perhaps. And petroglyphs were found in the Eastern Desert, showing, petroglyphs are carvings on rock, showing pictures of ships of the invading race. So done and dusted. However, in 1945, and decolonization started, there was a fashion to promote, well-meaning fashion, to promote the indigenous origins of certain countries, of newly independent countries, Egypt being one. And so things changed, and academics started saying, no, there was no invasion, everything was indigenous. And this was reinforced by Egyptologists saying, oh, my subject is precious, it's unique. And Assyriologists were saying the same about Mesopotamia. So in the last, 40 years, I suppose, there's been a lot of pushback on this. And it hasn't been dead and buried, but I think more and more people are believing the obvious, which is that Egypt was invaded to create the pharaohs. So if you think about it, this is quite something. A seaborne invasion from Uruk round into the Red Sea, through the Wadis to Nekhen and Memphis. Mm. So you say, why? Now, whereas not everybody, but there's an increasingly momentum towards the Egyptian invasion, I'm asking, well, why? And the obvious answer to me seems to be for the gold. And why did they want the gold? So that Uruk could pay for Indian imports. And when you say, well, that's a bit of a stretch, isn't it? Maybe, but we do know that the price of gold increased from Egypt through to the Mesopotamia, increasing each stop. And we know that Indians always love gold. We don't have any records, but think about the rest of history. When the Romans traded with India, what did they want? What did they have to pay with? Gold. And the emperors of Rome kept on grumbling about it, but it was profitable, so they couldn't stop it. When Vasco da Gama got to Calicut, the Samudra laughed at his traded goods and wrote a letter to the King of Portugal saying, this is what we want. On top of the list, gold. And the English East India Company in the 17th century, what did they have to pay with? Gold, because they hadn't got anything else that the Indians needed. So it's not completely fanciful to suggest that Indian demand for gold triggered the invasion of Egypt, which set up the pharaohs.
So what you're trying to say is that by that time, the civilization, the Indus Saraswati civilization, was a very well established trading union set up, and and that was trading with the region at least, leave alone the world and world at large.
I think so. I mean, I don't know whether this is well accepted or not, but one has to say, the Indus Sarasvati civilization is usually dated to 3000 onwards, but that's when bronze was invented, or metallurgy. So one has to assume that maybe that's got something to do with it. But it had ancient antecedents. The Greek historian Aryan, in the 1st century AD, said that the northwest kings of India stretched back for 6,000 years, more than 6,000 years, which puts it into the 7th, maybe even the 8th millennium BC, because he had a king list there, which has now disappeared. But so, yes, we have ancient antecedents. It didn't pop out from nowhere, did it?
Yeah, of course. Because there's also another interesting theory, which is although the Saraswati as a river changed course, disappeared, went underground, there are a lot of things about it. But the Indus civilization was there. But the fact that it is found the way it is found, it is pretty much buried, and there is radiation. Some people talk about that. Of course, it's in Pakistan, so I don't think any Indian wants to go there and check it out. But whatever remnants I hear, there are loads of things which are unexplained as of now. So it's like there was a massive war in that area, which destroyed it, which shifted people out, or just finished whatever was there. Because for a long time after that, no king wanted to go there and even conquer or make a civilization.
Well, I think the accepted reason now, if you don't mind me saying so, is that actually it was one or a series of earthquakes that diverted the river and made a very productive area, now the Thar Desert, and so it became virtually uninhabitable, and triggered an exodus, a migration to the Ganges, but also into Eurasia and Mesopotamia.
When we talk about, you said the controversial subject of the Aryan invasion, of course, it's been debunked. It's very clearly known, as you were talking offline as well. But it's used in India as a political weapon. And you mentioned a little history, a little taste of that as well, that you've got to receive, or you've seen after you've written about India. Let me hear your thoughts. Why you say this is a debunked theory and it's pointless?
Well, the idea that the very sparsely populated steppe peoples could invade and conquer the most populated area of the world at the time seems to me to be utterly nonsensical. And I cannot understand. I think some European universities still study Proto-Indo-European, trying to find the original language of the steppe, even though historians have basically said there was none. Linguists, probably after funding, I guess, continue this search for a language of the steppe. But there was no unified language of the steppe anyway. Classical historians talk of traders on the Black Sea speaking hundreds of languages, or over 100 languages, because they came into infrequent contact. They congregated in the Black Sea Black Sea ports to sell their wares. But otherwise, they interacted infrequently, and so of course they spoke different languages. So the whole thing doesn't work. It's just, and not only that, but no site has ever been identified as the originator for this invasion. Not to mention that these nomads, as they apparently were using chariots, which are impractical for cattle herding and are crossing great rivers to conquer. The whole thing doesn't make any sense at all.
When you see, and by the way, this whole theory has created a whole subsect of politics within India, and I don't want to get into that because that's not the focus of our discussion. When we talk about, why do you think this in the Aryan invasion theory was brought into being and propagated by a certain, I don't know, politically, was it politically convenient? Was it colonially convenient? What was the reason that this thing was brought out? Didn't any historian back in history said, what are you talking about? This is not correct.
Yeah, well, again, I talked about fashion in history. In 1945, stressing the indigenous origins of newly independent nations. And I think it was a fashion. We got to remember that the first East India Company officials in India in the 1780s and 90s were fascinated by Indian history, culture, language. Sir William Jones was the guy that found the link between Sanskrit, Latin, Persian, Latin, Greek, and Celtic languages, and they were British Indologists. Knew or found the Sarasvati River and the various changes of courses. And then during the 19th century, Britain became more and more Christian and more influenced by evangelical Christianity, and the truth of Christianity will overpower all superstitions. And so there was a change of emphasis, and the emphasis sadly was on debunking early enlightened British colonialists, if you like, and downgrading India, and especially the Sarasvati was apparently a myth, just ignoring earlier works, and Christian, and at the same time, archaeologists were uncovering Mesopotamian civilizations, conveniently the center of Christianity. So that must be the center of the cradle of civilization. And so we were sent down a ridiculous cul-de-sac. Also, the dating was wrong. I mean, Max Muller was tasked with translating the Rig Veda, and at first he put it at 1500 BC, and then during his lifetime he wrote back on that and said, I don't know, this is the minimum date, but these are fantastic pieces of literature, and they could be 15,000 years old. But and he disavowed the idea that Aryan was a racial thing. He thought it was linguistic, whereas I think now we know it's religious. But but his initial dates became ingrained as fact, and lazy historians, I'm afraid, didn't check it, and they haven't done. I mean, in my book I refer to books of 2008 and 2010, which still don't question that chronology, which is crazy. So that's how it starts, and they're very these myths, historical myths, are very difficult to eradicate once they have started. And you say that it's become politicized in India. Well, there's probably entrenched interests that want to
Yeah,
keep it going.
of course.
Yeah.
So, the Hinduism, the Sanatan Dharma, as it's called in India, has literature. And when you talk about the Vedas, it has mentions about the nine planets, the positions, the kind of stars, navigation techniques, and a whole lot of stuff, science and
Yep.
history, geography, and algebra. And when you, it's just amazing the kind of literature which is there in these Vedas. It talks about the science of war, the art of war, a whole lot of things.
Mm.
The principles of flight, by the way, are mentioned in that. Now, the sheer fact, okay, let's take Max Muller's date, 1500, 2000 BC. Doesn't make sense, it's not true. But let's take that into consideration for a minute. That's 2000 years before Christ itself.
Yep.
So why isn't that the Vedas as a literature itself been considered as the basis of science in the world? If they are mentioning Galileo discovered what he discovered in 1595, 1495, 15th, 16th century, here is 3000 years before him. People have written about the same discoveries just looking at the plain black sky. Why were these texts ignored in your perspective, sir?
Um, mm, I don't know. I mean, history is a fairly young subject. It's a couple of hundred years old, and these uh, the conclusions reached in the 19th century, as I said, are difficult to remove. Um, but certainly, um, as you say, these texts are voluminous, and they were updated continually, as far as I know, up to about 2,000 years ago. I don't know whether anything has been updated since then, and that gap maybe explains that Indians maybe lost a little bit of their history then, because nobody was updating the. I mean, Panini, I think, was the last one to update Sanskrit in the first or second century BC. I may be a bit hazy there, but thereafter they weren't, and so um, maybe it's not all our fault. Maybe maybe the colonialists weren't at fault. Maybe there's something that went wrong in India. I don't know that.
No,
But
it did. It did. You're right, because by the time it came out to be about the 8th century, we had the Islamic invasions that started,
right,
and from then till 12th, 13th century, 500 years it took them to breach India. And post then the conquest started off, and the whole, how it goes with the Islamic invasions.
mm,
And by the time the Islamists went away, it was right down up till about 1600s, 90 or something like that, where the Marathas came up. And the Marathas were at the peak of their power till about 1760s. The belief is that the Islamists, the Mughals were sitting here, and the British came and took over from the Mughals. It's not the way it is. It is the Mughals were there because they were the kings of the Marathas. So the
right,
British actually took over from the Marathas. So there was a pure Hindu nation called India, which was existing in India, Bharat,
mm,
as they call it. Uh, if you see the maps of 1769, 1770, 1775, it was there. So the British, when they came, they took over from this because the king at that time of India, he died, and there was no successor. So it was a power vacuum. People
right.
started breaking off, and there you go. And that's the easiest way to go stuff. So people
Okay,
forget
so
this. The
but
Islamic invasion basically
the
stopped a
Islamic
lot.
so
Yeah,
you're blaming the Islamic invasions for the destruction of
yeah.
the
Well, they
Northwest Indian culture.
40,000 temples.
Yeah.
The first one of the first invaders, Babur, um, we've recently, I mean, there's been public debate about him, and what is now common knowledge in India is that when he went back to Kabul from Delhi, he massacred 50,000 Hindus and put their skulls in heaps so that he could find his way out to Kabul
Mm.
and lit them on fire.
Yeah, well, that'll do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So today, those kind of things are being spoken about in India because somewhere people didn't want us to know about all this. I don't know why, politically or whatever it was. But
Mm.
today, those things are spoken about. So there's sort of a correction which is happening about our own history within
Good.
India. So when we hear people like that, you from the West, who talk about this, is very interesting to us. And I'm going to ask you one more question before I let you go, sir. And I'm going to keep in touch with you with your permission as I get
Please.
your book, read it, and I'm going to get you back for another chat. The maritime trade, and that's your main focus.
Mm.
Where did India stand as far as maritime trade is concerned? What kind of prowess, naval prowess, navigation prowess have you been able to uncover? And where do you grade the whole birth of navigation in the world?
Well, a birth of navigation goes back a very long way. After all, when we came out of Africa, we had to cross the Red Sea. So the first exodus out of Africa was by sea, and we got to Australia about 60,000 years ago. And over the last, things are happening so fast. But literally over the last 5 years, the date for humans getting to America has been pushed back to about 40,000 years ago. Now, in my book, which was only published in 2021, I suggest that humans got there via the Bering Straits by sea, which they did, but some must have got there much earlier. And I would now venture to suggest that with sea levels at 120 meters below where they are now, they probably accessed the islands and atolls that are now an ocean ridge, which stretch from Rapa Nui, Easter Island, to Peru. So we haven't got the boats, but we got the people that were there, and we got evidence of the people that were there. So it goes back a long way. And in the Vedas, they celebrate the civilization. They celebrate going for profitable voyages. They pray before a voyage to come back with a lot of money. Goodness me, the very creation myth, if you like, is Indian creation myth, is the churning of the oceans. So it goes back. I think we were seafaring humans. The humans were seafaring beings from before we were Homo sapiens. There's an island in the Mediterranean where they've discovered stone axes in Crete, actually. The stone axes that are 130, maybe 800,000 years old, but it's like Paleolithic. So not Homo sapiens, but a Homo erectus species of some kind. So I think this goes back a very long way. But during the Ice Ages, the Indian Ocean was the great superhighway. We've got ice coming down through to Japan, northern China, straight through all Europe. So really, it was the Indian Ocean that was the center of this. And with India right in the middle, with Sunderland before that was swallowed up in the 5,600 flood. That's now Indonesia. This was the center. I'm convinced of it.
Interesting. Thank you so much, sir, for the time and your insight. I'm going to read your book. As I said, you've convinced me, because maritime trade, we in India recently have discovered, and I'll just leave you with this, that if you flip the map of India, we've got more area to cover in the maritime area than the ground itself. So
Yeah,
we've actually realized the country is larger in the ocean rather than on land. So let's please start doing something about it. So today, India, as the government, has started up something called, as you mentioned, the mixing of the oceans. It's known as Samudra Manthan. Ocean is Samudra, Manthan is to mix. So we are
mm,
talking about, deep discoveries of what are uh, minerals, resources, a whole lot of stuff within the oceans. And we are talking about basically focusing out towards the Indian Ocean, finally in our in our course of history. So thank you so much for that insight, and I'm sure it's your book and your work is going to be insightful to all of us. To the
thank you
audience,
for
please,
hosting me.
thank you. To the audience, please leave your comments and let me know. And his book is available on Amazon. Click, you can buy it in one shot. I don't know if it's available on Kindle. Is it, sir?
Yes, it
On
is. Yeah,
is it is. So there you go. So read it. Let us know about what you guys think. Till then, namaskar.
thank you.